Sound very clear. Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He comes to us from Sydney, Australia, and he published a book. Title of the book is Merchants of Menace, the true story of the Nugan Hand Bank scandal. And I did not read the book, but I have listened to a podcast that's based on the book. And you can check that out on iTunes. It's titled Merchants of Menace. And his name is Peter Butt. And really fascinating research on something that I came across in the past, this kind of banking scandal that preceded kind of the BCCI scandal. But Mr. Butt can talk more about that. So, Peter, are you there?
Yeah. How are you going?
I'm doing well. Thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have heard of you or this story, can you talk about your background and what led you to write and then make a podcast titled Merchants of Menace?
Yeah, sure. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I make serious documentaries. History, science, investigative has become, I guess, my the area that I want to go into more as years go on. And back in 2012, I think I started reinvestigating the Nugan Hand Bank scandal for a documentary series, which was actually funded 90%, and then it collapsed in 2014. So I decided to write a book and then do a podcast. Basically, from 2012 on, I went back to the original investigators who were involved in this story. They were both police, the Attorney General, the opposition Attorney General in the state government. There were corporate affairs investigators, and also I contacted anyone that I could that was involved in the bank itself. And there were very few people that wanted to talk about it because it was a pretty hairy time for them. Most of them a lot of them actually had changed their names. That's how serious it was. Yeah.
And so for people who may not have heard of this, it was a huge scandal in Australia. Can you talk about how this group started and why it was such a huge scandal in Australia?
Yeah, well, look, most people didn't know about the Nugan Hand Bank. It was a very small enterprise compared to normal banks. In fact, it was just basically a merchant bank without being registered as such. And it didn't come to the public's arena until January 1980. It had been in operation for 7 years, but it didn't come into the news until one of the partners, Frank Nugan, he was an Australian lawyer, partnered with an American ex-service person, ex-CIA, Michael Hand. Frank Nugan was found dead in his Mercedes on a country road with a shotgun in his hand and a bullet to his brain. And then the story broke, and everybody was really interested. How come this merchant banker is dead? He was 37 years old. People didn't know too much about it, but then the story came out that a few days later, the bank was shredding its documents, and then Michael Hand disappeared about 4 months later after the coroner's inquest. So basically, they started in 1973. These two young guys, about 30 years old. Frank was a lawyer who basically got shafted because he had a migrant background. He couldn't get anywhere in the legal world. So he decided to go into investments and started a bank with this American guy who turned up on R&R, or just after the R&R period started in Australia. He'd been in Vietnam, he'd been in Laos, and they got together. They started this kind of money-raising organisation. They were offering 2% more than the market to investors, but they got into all sorts of nasty stuff, including money laundering for drug traffickers, and became the paymaster for the CIA.
And how did that develop from just a simple merchant bank in Australia to this bank that had branches all over the world?
Well, it started quite inauspiciously. They took an office about 200 yards from the Opera House. So they had a very fancy address. They started knocking on people's doors and saying, invest in us, invest in us. But within about 18 months, they had their first branch in Hong Kong. And it was, from that point on, it looked like it was going to be very successful. But it went into a hibernation when Michael Hand actually up and left. He started the Hong Kong branch. He sent Frank Nugan a note to say, look, I'm quitting the bank. I'm going turkey shooting. Turkey farming, actually, but he was actually going turkey shooting. He was going off on a CIA operation into Angola. So it slowly disintegrated while Mike was away. But then he turned up about a year later and said, I'm coming back to the bank. Within about 2 years, they had open branches all over the world, 13 branches, including on the Asian side of things. They were in Manila, they were in Singapore and Chiang Mai. And one of the big mysteries was, why would you open a branch in Chiang Mai? Well, that was to attract drug money from the barons of drugs in Southeast Asia, plus the Thai military.
And do you think that the intent when they started the bank in, 1973, was to launder money? Or because Michael Hand had a very kind of intelligence military background, correct?
Yes, exactly. Look, to get into their minds is a difficult thing because there was very little left in the bank records. They shredded basically everything. And when Michael Hand disappeared, it was very hard to ask him questions. But you could see that it was a bit of it was a strange path that they took. And it wasn't, I don't think it was planned too well at the front, because Michael Hand, in his blood, he was a military man. And his interest was more in building up a relationship with the military people around the world and the CIA people around the world. He'd actually worked in Laos on secret training of the Hmong hill tribes. They were trying to hold back the Vietnamese insurgency into Laos. And Michael became quite famous for that. And his military connections increased and increased and increased around the world. He was fated by the military apparatchik, and that connection sort of built up into a CIA connection.
Right, but sorry to interrupt, but didn't his time in Laos, isn't that where he worked under Bill Colby? So that was where his relationship started, was even before Nugan Hand Bank?
Yes, of course. Well, it started, yes, in the 60s.
Gotcha. And Colby was the head of operation, was it Phoenix Operation?
It was called, it was Phoenix, yes. Yeah. But he was there on a secret project called 404, which was training the Hmong tribes.
Gotcha.
Yes, and so he did work under William Colby, and that connection stayed because William Colby became the legal advisor to the Nugan Hand Bank in 1979, just before it collapsed.
Right. So, so this guy has a background. He had a high IQ. I think in the thing, he had like a 131 IQ. So very intelligent guy, but super sketchy, traveling around, starting banks popped up. And they were talking about substantial numbers for back then for 1975 to 1980, correct?
Yeah. Substantial amounts of money, of course, yes. But we never know exactly how much because of the destruction of records. There was at least $50 million missing from the bank in just deposits from the everyday people, American service people working in the Middle East, and Australians, just mums and dads who put money into this bank.
Wow.
Yeah.
So real substantial kind of money loss. But then, during its time, he attracts a bunch of kind of deep state type people from the U.S. to work at Nugan Hand, correct?
Yeah, when it collapsed, there were 5 definitely known CIA former operatives. He had connections through the Navy and the military, and he recruited a number of he had admirals, generals, who were all part of the bank structure. So yeah, exactly. He was very well connected, and the bank was seemingly going in that way. That you mentioned the other banks that came afterwards.
BCCI was one of them.
That's right.
Banks
that's
of
right.
Credit Commerce International.
Yeah, it was kind of the precursor to those banks. Yeah.
Right. So they were doing all kinds of clearing all over the world, right? So they're working with Hong Kong triads, Golden Triangle, heroin. So Hand is working with these real underground people who need money laundering, right? So people would just draw. I mean, I think in your podcast, it's just like somebody dropped off money and said, "Figure out, I'll get a receipt later" or something, right?
Yeah, he said, "Look, if you're going to screw me now, if you're going to screw me with or without a receipt, one way or another, it doesn't matter.
Right.
You're going to screw me."
Right. Well, he had all of these, and so then I think there was the regulators of Australia knew something was going on. Were investigating Nugan and Hand, correct? While the bank was operating.
Yeah, the first inkling they got was to do with Frank Nugan. Frank Nugan's family came from a town called Griffith, which was halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, and it was a dope growing area. It had just become a dope growing area when the bank started, and they were suspicious that Frank's brother, who ran a massive transport company for the produce that was coming out of there, was also moving drugs and was dealing with the drug traffickers moving their marijuana to the markets. And so they became suspicious of that. They started to investigate because the drug issue was becoming quite large, and basically they were on the money because that's exactly what they were doing. And so for Frank Nugan, he believed he was above the law. He believed that he was not going to be caught. And when they found his body, he had dead. He was in his car. They went to the boot of his car. They pulled out his briefcase. There was a ledger with 24 drug traffickers listed in the ledger.
So he was probably kind of working as a front man for them, right? So, or something, or perhaps considering that all the documentation was shredded, right?
Yeah, basically how it worked was when Michael was away over in Angola, and Frank was left to his own resources, he started to move money for drug traffickers, and he worked out a way of moving money internationally that nobody could work out how it was happening. So basically, it was called a contra, where a drug trafficker would come into the Sydney office, hand over a couple of $100,000. They'd be able to go to Hong Kong and pick up that $100,000 minus 15%. In Hong Kong, and it was basically coming out of deposits out of Hong Kong. It was totally illegal at the time. I mean, today we can move money quite easily, but in those days it was a lot of money that was moving, and it basically there was no paper trail. So that actually increased the drug problem in Australia.
Right. So there was all kinds of shady transfers of money, but then there was also when the bank went defunct, I think that there was a commission, right? A royal commission to investigate how this whole bank operated and collapsed, correct?
That's right. Yeah. A royal commission is kind of like a grand jury investigation, I guess, but it's without a jury. It's done by a very high powered they've got freedom to go anywhere. They basically dig deep into this bank. But there were other investigators working independently. There was the Drug Bureau, where Narcotics Bureau was investigating. There was the police were investigating. The Corporate Affairs were investigating, but the Royal Commission basically messed up. And Frank Nugan's legacy was that they didn't basically find anything. That was it. Frank had he'd left everything there to be found, and Mike Hand destroyed it.
Gotcha. Right. So Mike Hand comes in after Nugan dies and threatens everybody, and then all of the destruction of the records takes place. Right. So right away.
Yeah, the Corporate Affairs turned up at the door at Nugan Hand a few days later, and the staff were just shredding everything.
Right. So there's all this, and there was a tie-in. I think you talked about, or I think I remember, there was an anti-drug crusader, Donald McKay, who was murdered. He was kind of an infamous killing in Australia. Can you talk about that and how it might be tied to Nugan Hand?
Sure. Well, this is he was a conservative politician. Conservative, politically connected person in the town of Griffith, where we're talking about, where the drugs were basically coming from, marijuana. It was a big deal down there. He was trying to stop the drug trade. He ended up, we know that he was shot outside of a hotel. His body was never found. And there was a massive inquiry into that. They discovered, they believed that there were 3 people involved by the names of Sergi and another fellow. These were the big marijuana growing families down there in Griffith. Now, the Nugans became involved because they found an auditor within the bank, within the trucking company, discovered cash checks in the names of those people, and went to the Corporate Affairs Commission and blew the whistle on them and said that this looks like it's money to pay off for the killing of this politician. So it was a very big deal, and that really put the heat onto Nugan Hand. The Corporate Affairs people were watching the Nugan Hand Bank. They were inquiring. They basically ended up charging Frank Nugan and his brother. Frank Nugan was a director in the family company, and that was beginning of the downfall of Frank Nugan. He started to drink. He was drinking about a bottle and a half of scotch every day.
Wow.
He'd start at 8 o'clock in the morning. He became out of control, and it was the beginning of the end, I guess, for Frank Nugan and ultimately the Nugan Hand Bank.
And so there's a question about whether he committed suicide or he was suicided, like it was a fake suicide. What is your thought about what happened to Frank Nugan?
Well, it's probably the most interesting question because it's never been answered. There were plenty of people who would like to have had him shut up. He was going to go to court very soon after the date of his death. And his brother did go to jail because of activities related to the family company. So Frank may have seen the writing on the wall and didn't want to go through that, and he could have committed suicide. It looked like a suicide. It's very hard to set up somebody in a car with a rifle. He was sitting in the driver's seat. He blew his head apart, but nobody knows why he drove 120 kilometers away from his home to do it. Nobody could work out why he did it where he did. There was a lot of suspicion about the police that turned up at 4 o'clock in the morning and found his body. How did the police know to be driving down a country road in the middle of nowhere at 4 o'clock in the morning and come across a fresh suicide? So there are these kind of questions that I guess the podcast really goes into depth into that. I'm kind of agnostic about this, whether he did it himself or whether it was done. It was convenient to everybody. It was convenient to Frank. It was convenient to everybody. The drug traffickers. It was convenient to the family. Everybody was against Frank. Frank had gone off the rails, if you know what I mean.
Right, and then they blamed everything on Frank, right? So if anything went wrong, it was him, and then he killed himself. So he stole the money, he did this, and he was actually, I mean, I think part of the podcast talks about this guy Doug Sapper, where he was trying to pay somebody $50,000, which at the time is a substantial amount of money, to I think go after what would be the attorney general of one of the states. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, Frank had already opened up a fake Swiss bank account in the Attorney General's name. He was after the Attorney General because the Attorney General was after him. And so then Frank offers $50,000 to anyone who can get rid of the Attorney General. And so a couple of guys went up to Hong Kong, approached Doug Sapper, who was an army mate of Mike Hand's. And Doug Sapper said, well, I'm not your guy. I go down there to Sydney, kill this guy, and you shoot me in the lobby. You know, I don't get out of the place. He could read these people. He could see the scenario that was going to unfold, and he turned it down. But it was pretty strong evidence that Frank Nugan was serious about getting rid of the Attorney General.
Right. So there's just all kinds of intrigue and cutthroat, dagger, spy versus spy type of stuff, cloak and dagger stuff going on. And so the money disappears, the bank goes belly up, and then Michael Hand disappears, right?
Yeah, Michael Hand, the last time he was seen by anybody was when he walked out of the coroner's inquest into Frank Nugan's death, which basically said it was suicide. So Mike walks out, gets into a car, and is basically never seen again. Now, but what he did do is Michael Hand was connected to a bar owner. He was his mentor in Australia was an American bar owner by the name of Bernie Houghton. He owned the Bourbon and Beefsteak Bar at King's Cross, which was the seedy, drugs, sex,
kind of like red light district or something.
Red light district, yeah. And Bernie was a fixer. And Bernie knew everybody in the military. Bernie was former CIA himself. And so Mike said, "All right, we've got to get out of this country. They're not going to let me out of the country. I'm going to have to face the music. So what do we do?" So Bernie had a former colleague who owned a meat company, and so Mike went to hide above his premises, and Mike then called on a former CIA operative from Arizona who came out. He was a specialist in photography. They created a brand new passport in a different, the fellow who was looking after him, the meat guy, he had an employee. He just asked for his birth certificate and things like that, created a new passport in this guy's name, and created a disguise. He looked like Clouseau out of, the Pink Panther movies. It was very bizarre. But somehow he got out of the country. They both left at the same time. I've got I was able to get hold of the departure records for these people. And so they both moved out of the country. And Mike then disappeared and was never seen again.
Right. So that's gone. And so what was the result of the collapse of Nugan Hand? Was there payouts? Did the government try to remunerate people? Or what happened with the wreckage of this firm?
Everybody lost, including American workers that were over in the Middle East and American military people in the Middle East. There were mums and dads down in Sydney. They just all lost their money, and then a lot of people didn't come forward because of the notoriety of this bank. A lot of people just did not want to be connected to it. And so they didn't put in an application for money. There was obviously a liquidator that came in and divvied up what was left, but there were, it was just peanuts compared to what was lost.
Wow, it's just incredible. Just an incredible amount of money for that time, $50 million. And I think that Stewart Royal Commission pushed something in 1985, at least on your podcast, that said Nugan Hand Limited was at all times insolvent. So it was never a functioning bank with resources. It was always just a big kind of Ponzi scheme. Take money here, put it over there. Pretty incredible that they got away for it for 7 years.
They got away with it. Yeah, that I don't know how these companies. I don't think would ever last too long. We've seen other CIA connected companies come a cropper, so they don't last too long.
Yeah, and there were big names. I mean, William Colby was the head of the CIA at one point. I think he was involved in a lot of things going on. Right, as Nugan Hand was happening here in the States, he was involved in the can't remember the name of the commission, but huge things going into all the CIA's cloak and dagger stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, Edwin Black's people might know his name. He's connected to Ted Shackley, the blonde ghost who was over in Vietnam at that time. So a bunch of huge names in 1979. So connected, very well connected. So Michael Hand disappears in 1980, but that's not the full story, is it?
No, well, it was Nugan Hand was one of these stories in Australia that was kind of full of mystery. We never ever got the big story, the full story. And with Michael Hand's disappearance, we knew that he was the person who knew everything or knew what happened. Let's find him. And every investigative journalist in Sydney, was looking for him. Look, even in the country, we're looking for him. And I had no ambition of finding him. I did, while I was writing the book, I thought, I'll give it a go. Everybody else has failed, so what chance have I got? But as I got to the last chapter of my book, I thought, I'll give it another go. And I just made a few deductions. And one was that anybody that's involved in the espionage world they can change their identity, but invariably they will never change their first name, because if somebody from their past comes up to them and they're with somebody from the current world that they're living in, and they say, hi Jack, but you're really known as Mike, then you've got a problem. So they keep their first name. And I thought, well, maybe he might even keep his middle name, which was John, Jon, as opposed to John, which was more common. 10 times more common. So, and I thought, well, one day his money might have run out and he might have had to go back into business. So I thought, well, he's probably back in the US. He's run out of money. He started a new business. He must be registered somewhere. And I just thought I'll go from state to state and look at through company records. And it didn't take very long, but I went from, where was it? New York, New Jersey, Arizona, Washington State. And then I went to another one nearby, and there I found some records with a Michael John Fuller. And I looked at the signatures on his company records over there, and they matched the Michael John of the signatures here that I had from 1977. Wow. And then I checked his social security number. It was exactly the same. So I knew I had him. And I basically got a private detective on from his state to go down there and capture on film Michael Hand alive. And then I went to 60 Minutes here, which is same, is allied to your 60 Minutes in the US. And they jumped at the story, and so we outed him.
So they flew to the U.S. to confront this person believed to be Michael Hand, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And so, and that was 2015. So a quarter of a century had passed, and this was. Would you say that was 100% confirmation that was the same person?
Oh, absolutely. I had his photograph. And I was able to marry it with photographs of him that were online in his new identity. They matched perfectly. Everything was him. I mean, he knew it was him. He knew he was caught. When he was caught, when the cameras were rolling and walking towards him as he walked out of a store, he knew he was gone. And his company said, this is all a misunderstanding.
Right, but he didn't even answer, so he didn't even say yes or no. So 60 Minutes Australia is asking him questions that he just kept his mouth shut, which can tell you a lot. I think that's very telling that he just never even issued a general denial to them. And what happened after that?
Well, the people, it was big news over there. It was big news in America. Newsweek and ProPublica and other newspapers picked it up. It's been big news around the world, in fact, because he was big just because of his background and the story. It's full of intrigue. So it forced him to once he knew that he was finished. Before the 60 Minutes program went to air, he signed off he started a manufacturing company. He signed that over to his employees. And basically, I think he went underground from that moment on. The local news, TV news services in his area, which was Idaho Falls, they covered the story. They interviewed neighbors who said they weren't too happy to be living next door to this guy who ripped off people. And so we really don't know if he moved, but he did go sort of underground. And then we heard only just recently, I think it was early this year, that he'd passed away, or end of last year. And his company came out to say that basically said that he'd retired, but he still stayed in touch with the company daily. So
interesting.
It was probably
not
just
a full retirement. How old would he have been? Do you know what year he was born? So he's probably born in the 40s or 50s, right?
He was born the day of the Pearl Harbor attack.
So 1941, right? So he was definitely in his close to 80 then when he passed away.
Yeah,
or 70,
that's
80,
right.
80, yeah. So wow. So what a life that he had actually a quarter century of anonymity for some time. I mean, who knows what he was doing for that quarter century?
Well, we do know something, and that was that after he left the Nugan Hand Bank, disappeared from Australia, he certainly went underground, as did virtually every American that was involved in the bank, and there were lots of them. They kind of disappeared. Some changed their names. Michael obviously changed his name, and because he had the CIA connections, he was asked to go to, this is our understanding from records that I have, that he was asked to go to Honduras to train the Honduran military and to how to counterinsurgents into Nicaragua. Because so it was basically
the communist or left wing insurgents. He was training against them, right?
Exactly, and so this was just in the early days of the Oliver North story.
Right. Wow. So he was just mixing with all of these characters, and then Bill Colby dies a very suspicious death. They don't find his body for 9 days or something like that, supposedly on a water outing. I mean, just a lot, just the cloak and dagger stuff that went on for decades. This story is really incredible. It's just an incredible story.
Yeah. Well, he went on to start training companies. This company went to Africa and other countries, a lot of countries in Africa, teaching them how to become special forces troops. So
which he was, and I mean, they said that, like, I think early in the podcast, he cut off some guy's head in Vietnam. Like, he was a real savage with a high IQ. Really, one of these kind of deep state operative types.
Yes, he was, and it was, my wife was always concerned that I was going to get knocked off for finding him. But look, you just got to accept that if that happens, but it's not going to happen.
Right? I mean, he's probably he probably had a sigh of relief when he passed away. I would assume. Just
she had a sigh.
One less thing to worry about.
My wife did. She said, "You sure he's dead?"
Oh, really? Well, that's the whole thing with these guys. You never really know. But I mean, his time, like all the rest of ours, comes around when you're 70, 80, or 90. But what a great story. But you've done other research. There's other things on your website. This is a great story, podcast and book, which you can get from merchantsofmenace.net. But can you talk about some of your other inquiries or investigative journalism documentaries that you've done? Because I see some other ones here.
Sure. Look, I basically go into Australian history. Australian history is, everything's accessible now after 30 years to 50 years. So I specialise in Australia's nuclear history, and I also do work on crime stories. And here we have one of the most amazing crimes of the 20th century. It's so unusual. It's about a couple called Dr. Bogle and Mrs. Chandler. And Dr. Bogle was a physicist who was found dead on the banks of Sydney River on New Year's Day, 1963. He was a married man, but he was with another man's wife, a colleague's wife. They were both found dead, and they could never work out how they died. It's one of the most extraordinary stories in Australian crime. And I happened to discover a cause of death, which didn't come up at the time. So it's been with the coroner for a number of years now. We're trying to actually push the coroner to establish how they died. And other cases I do in espionage and espionage history. Here we had a 50-year-old case, nearly 60-year-old case of a spy case that went wrong, a rendezvous with a double agent and a Russian spy who was basically it was to do with nuclear secrets here, British nuclear secrets. It collapsed, and they had the spy agency had all of this footage that it had filmed, surveillance footage of the case. I collected that over the years, and I went back into the final rendezvous, which collapsed, and I basically identified somebody within that footage who was the Russian spy. And
what was the name of that case, or how is it commonly referred to in Australia? Is there like a title for it or something?
It's called the Skripal case.
Skripal case.
Skripal, yeah, and Skripal was the first secretary of the Soviet embassy in Australia, and he was after British nuclear secrets, which we had the British atomic tests happening on our land. So that was the name of the case. My film should be available. There's ABC iView. Our television network is called ABC and iView, and it's now available internationally. It's called Final Rendezvous.
Final Rendezvous. And who was Tony Llewellyn-Jones? You have another title here, I Spy.
I Spy. Tony Llewellyn-Jones was an actor, actually.
He's the actor in that. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's in a story called I Spy. That was about the first 20 years of our spy agency called ASIO. Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, so you got some good espionage cases. This one was fascinating. Merchants of Menace. I didn't see it on Amazon, but that was maybe just the U.S. version, so people can maybe go to the Australian version and get a copy of it, or a Kindle version, or where can people find the book?
The book is on Amazon, and it should be available. If you can't get it on the American site, go to the Australian one. But you've got to mention Merchants of Menace, The True Story of the Nugan Hand Bank. Since I wrote this book, mine was the only title with Merchants of Menace, but there's about 6 or 7 now, or 10 or even books called Merchants of Menace. So you've just got to search it out. But
there it is. Okay, I didn't see it at my first try, so it is there. So you just put out a new version, May 18th, 2021. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's got some new chapters at the end. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. I didn't see that at first try. So it's there. It's here on the U.S. version if people want to check that out. And then your website, again, is merchantsofmenace.net, correct?
That's right. Yeah, and it's got lots of extras on there.
Yeah.
So
I see you've done a lot of different type of works and a lot of different books and things that are interesting. But yeah, really fascinating. Great podcast. You are the narrator of the podcast, and I'll put the link to the show on iTunes in the show description here and on my podcast, so people can check that out as well. But again, the title of the book and podcast is Merchants of Menace, The True Story of the Nugan Hand Bank Scandal by Peter Butt. Thank you so much for your time, Peter.
Thanks, William.
All right,
Cheers.
take care. All right, don't go anywhere.
All right.
Stay there. Stay there. Stay there.
Okay.